He didn't know her name, he had never seen her before, but when she collapsed in front of him on the busy sidewalk, everything else in his world stopped. If only she knew that one act of falling would change both their lives forever. It was a grey Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the city looked tired before the day even began. James Reynolds, 37, single father, was rushing through the crowded streets of Chicago's Loop, clutching his daughter Lily's forgotten lunchbox and a half-eaten granola bar in the other hand. He was already late for work again. He couldn't afford to lose this job, not after everything. But life didn't care about James's plans that day. She came out of nowhere. One moment, the street was full of people going about their business, and the next, a young woman stumbled, her knees buckling as if her legs had simply given up. She crumpled forward like a puppet with its strings cut, her body smacking the concrete with a sickening thud that silenced the crowd for a moment. James saw it happen 5 feet in front of him. Everyone else stepped around her. Some glanced down, eyebrows furrowed, but most kept walking. Maybe they assumed she was drunk, high, homeless, but James saw something else in her face. Fear, pain, exhaustion. Without thinking, he dropped Lily's lunchbox and rushed to her side. Hey, are you okay?" he asked, crouching beside her, gently turning her over. Her eyes were barely open, her lips cracked and pale. She looked young, early 20s maybe, her thin frame trembled. I'm fine," she whispered, barely audible, "just tired." "You collapsed on the street," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're not fine." "I just haven't eaten in a while," she murmured, trying to sit up and failing. "Please, I just need a minute." James glanced around. Still, no one stopped. He looked back at her, at the way her hands trembled, the bruises peeking out from under her coat sleeves, the way her eyes darted like a frightened animal's. Something was very wrong, and for some reason he couldn't explain, he couldn't walk away. "My name is James," he said. "You're coming with me." He called in sick, told his boss it was an emergency. And maybe it was, just not his. James brought the girl, her name was Emily, to a nearby diner. The waitress eyed them suspiciously as they sat in a booth in the back, but said nothing. James ordered her soup and toast and hot tea. When the food came, Emily stared at it as if unsure whether she was allowed to touch it. "Go ahead," he said softly. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. She ate like someone who hadn't had a hot meal in days. In between bites, she told him fragments of her story. Her mother had died 2 years ago. Her stepfather kicked her out 6 months after that. She'd been couch surfing, doing odd jobs, sleeping in shelters when she could, on the street when she couldn't. She'd had a job at a coffee shop, but lost it after getting sick and missing too many shifts. Everything spiraled after that. She had no ID, no address, no bank account, just herself, and that was barely holding together anymore. "I didn't mean to scare you," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I just didn't have anything left in me." James listened, really listened. His heart broke with every word, because in her story he heard echoes of his own. 3 years ago, his wife died from a sudden aneurysm. One moment, she was laughing at a joke over breakfast. The next, she was gone. James had never truly recovered. Raising Lily alone had been both a blessing and a battle. He'd had to fight for every bit of stability they had, sleepless nights, missed promotions, a mortgage that loomed like a shadow. He knew what it meant to fall, to scramble, to try and stay standing when everything inside was crumbling. And now here she was, Emily, on the edge of the same cliff he had once barely backed away from. He couldn't let her fall. Over the next few weeks, James did what no one had done for Emily in a long time. He showed up. He helped her apply for state aid. He found a non-profit that provided temporary housing for young women in crisis. He called in favors, donated what he could, and even asked Lily's school counselor for advice on how to help someone get back on their feet. Lily, just 9 years old, took to Emily instantly. One afternoon, she looked up at her dad and said, "Can she come to my birthday party?" James smiled. "I think she'd like that." Emily began to heal, It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. She had panic attacks, nightmares, moments when she tried to run, convinced she didn't deserve help. But James kept showing up. Not everyone leaves. He told her once when she was crying after a bad dream. "You didn't," she whispered. 6 months later, Emily stood at the edge of a community college auditorium stage, her hands shaking for a different reason this time. She had just earned a GED. She was smiling. In the front row sat James and Lily, beaming. That night, over pizza and soda in their tiny kitchen, Emily said something that stuck with James forever. "You didn't know me," she said, "but you saw me." James reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Sometimes, all someone needs is one person to see them. The camera pans out. The city is still moving. Life still rushes past. But somewhere in it, a girl who once collapsed on the street now walks strong. And a man who was just trying to survive found purpose in helping someone else rise. Sometimes, all someone needs is one person to see them. This sentence, seemingly simple, holds the entire weight of what it means to be human in a world that often looks away. In the chaos of everyday life, we walk past hundreds, even thousands of people without really seeing them. Not their pain, not their stories, not the quiet desperation they carry tucked beneath a polite smile or a bowed head. We become so consumed by our own responsibilities, our deadlines, our struggles, that we forget the extraordinary impact we could have just by noticing someone who's slipping through the cracks. James didn't know Emily. He had every reason to keep walking that day. He had a job he couldn't afford to lose, a daughter who depended on him, and a life already filled with hardship. But in that moment, he chose humanity over convenience. He saw past the assumptions, the way others dismissed Emily as just another unstable stranger on the street. And instead, he saw a person who was drowning silently, someone who had fought so long and so hard that her body simply gave up. His decision to stop, to care, to ask, "Are you okay?" was the first thread in what would become a lifeline for Emily, a series of moments that, strung together, pulled her from the brink of absolute collapse. And that's the power of seeing someone. It isn't about fixing them or saving them. It's about acknowledging their pain as real, their struggle as worthy of compassion. It's standing in front of someone who feels invisible and showing them, through your actions, that they matter. When we say, just one person can make a difference, it's not some cliché meant to make us feel good. It's a truth proven over and over in the quiet acts of kindness that never make headlines. Think about how many times we ourselves have been on the edge, may be not physically collapsed on the street, but emotionally drained, unseen, unheard. Maybe there was a moment in your own life when someone looked at you and really saw you, your sadness, your fatigue, your quiet plea for help. Maybe it was a teacher who stayed after class to ask how you were really doing, a friend who called when you had convinced yourself no one would notice your silence, a stranger who smiled at you at just the right moment. Those small moments have a way of anchoring us back to ourselves. And now imagine if you could be that anchor for someone else. We underestimate our power to change lives because we think it takes money, resources, status. But what Emily needed most that day was none of those things. She needed warmth, patience, presence. James had those things, and he gave them freely, even when it was inconvenient, especially then, and that choice didn't just save Emily, it saved a piece of him too. Helping her gave new shape to his grief, allowed his pain to have purpose, gave Lily a living example of what compassion really looks like. He didn't rescue her to feel like a hero. He stayed because he couldn't look away. Because he knew what it was like to feel like the world was spinning on without you, like you were screaming underwater and no one could hear. He saw her because once, someone had seen him too. That's how empathy works, it ripples. It moves from one act of grace to another, each time asking nothing in return but giving everything, and it's not just about dramatic movie-worthy gestures, it's in the everyday decisions we make, the colleague we check in on even though they said they're fine, the neighbor whose name we take time to learn, the homeless man we pass on the same corner each morning. Do we meet his eyes? Do we speak? Do we remember he's a human being, not scenery? Seeing someone is also a responsibility. Once we notice, we can't pretend not to. And yes, it might pull us out of our comfort zone, might cost us time or resources or energy we don't feel like we have to spare. But isn't that the kind of world we all want to live in? One where people matter more than productivity, where kindness is a reflex and not an afterthought, where no one has to collapse in the street before someone notices their pain. This story isn't about James being a savior or Emily being a victim. It's about two broken people finding strength in each other's humanity. It's about connection in a time where disconnection is the norm. It's about showing up, even when there's no guarantee of outcome. Because when James offered Emily help, he had no idea how it would turn out. She could have walked away. She could have disappeared again. But he showed up anyway. He believed, just for a moment, that doing the right thing mattered more than all the reasons not to. And in that moment, he planted the seed for everything that came after. Sometimes, that's all it takes. Not a grand plan, not a full solution, just the willingness to pause long enough to say, I see you. In a world that often rewards ambition over empathy and productivity over people, choosing to truly see someone is a radical act. It's not always glamorous, it's not always easy, but it is always worth it, because on the other side of that choice might be someone like Emily, someone who is quietly unraveling, hoping someone will notice before they disappear entirely. And you, just by caring, might be the thread that keeps them tethered to this world. So look around you, look closer. Someone near you is holding on by a thread. Be the person who sees them. Be the person who stays. Be the reason someone believes the world still holds a little kindness. Because you never know whose life you're saving simply by showing them they're not invisible. Kindness doesn't require perfection. You don't need all the answers. Sometimes, changing a life means simply not walking away. Be that person. Be the one who stays.